With this Guitar Lessons for Beginners video, we'll show you how to play bar chords by introducing you to 3 movable bar chord shapes that will ultimately increase your chord vocabulary by 36 chords. With guitar chord diagrams and bar chord finger exercises, we'll cover it all with this step-by-step approach. Learning bar chords will be a lot easier if you already have a foundation of some guitar basics, and that includes knowing your basic open chords, most notably E major, also known as just a regular E, E minor, and A minor. It also helps if you know how to name the letter notes on the guitar by using the chromatic scale. And then finally, an extra bonus would be if you reviewed our previous guitar basics lessons and you've tried the 4-string movable F chord shape. That'll also help with this lesson because that sort of prepares you getting your fingers in shape for now the bigger challenge of playing full bar chords. Now, what makes a chord a bar chord for guitar is that the first finger needs to lay across or bar the strings in order to make a certain chord shape movable. And an official bar chord, you have to either bar all 6 strings or 5 strings. And what we're going to do with this lesson is we're going to show you the most often used bar chord shapes. And we'll start with perhaps the most popular movable bar chord shape, and that uses an E, or also known as E major chord. It's a 4-step method, and how we go about step 1 is we simply make sure we have the initial E chord right, and you play an arpeggio. That'll be step 1. Now step 2, we fret the same chord but with different fingers. So instead of our 1, 2, and 3 fingers, we're going to switch now to the 2, 3, and 4 fingers. And note, when you do that, you free up your first finger because that's going to lead to the eventual bar. But step 2, switch your fingers, same chord, just different fingers fretting those notes. And that'll be step 2. Step 3, you take that shape for E major and slide it up 1 fret. And then, here comes the hard part, the first finger, you lay it across or bar the first fret, all 6 strings. And this will be a bit of a challenge to get a clear sounding arpeggio, but that's how you want to start off with the chord. You don't want to strum it. That's the easy way out. You want to play an arpeggio to make sure you have all strings sounding clear. And most likely, if you haven't done that before, it's going to be a challenge getting all 6 strings to ring clearly. Now that is step 3 with the movable bar chord shape for E. Now with step 3, we apply some music theory, some guitar logic to name this chord because yes, it's an E shape, but compared to the initial E chord, this chord sounds different. It's a different chord. We know it as using an E shape and barring it. But the name of this chord, that's where the chromatic scale comes in handy in your ability to find notes. The bass note will determine the letter name of the chord. So if you want, you can pause the video and see if you can figure out the name of this chord on your own. And we'll go over it in the next clip. Now, taking the movable E major shape and moving it up 1 fret and barring it, that results with an F major chord being played. All the notes here are the 3 essential notes that make up an F chord, but the key is knowing the note on the bass string. Initially we had the open 6-string E. As we move the shape up, now we're barring and that bass note becomes F. So that could be the key for you to know the name of this movable major chord. So that is step 3, getting acclimated to playing the bar. Step 4 is simply moving the shape up 1 fret at a time, because again, if you know your chromatic scale, once you know how to apply a movable chord shape and use a chromatic scale, you actually learn 12 new chords every time you learn a new chord shape. And here's what I mean. With the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, we have E as the open chord here with this movable shape. Then we move up 1 fret, that's an F major chord. Move up another fret, that's an F sharp chord, or also known as F sharp major. another way to play a G. This would be a G bar chord, or G along the 3rd fret position. And as you continue to count up the chromatic scale, you have technically, or unofficially, 12 potential chords you could play. It gets a little tricky to play super high up the fretboard, but the concept is there. With one movable chord shape, if you can apply the chromatic scale to it, you have now learned 12 new chords using one shape. Now, the same concept that applies to enharmonic notes also can be applied to movable chord shapes. And what I mean by that is you can give 2 names to the same chord. You can't do that with E, but you can't do that with F because it's not an enharmonic note, but F sharp is. And that other name you can give to this F sharp chord would be G flat. So with that in mind, again, you learn 12 different chords, but as far as naming these chords, all of the enharmonic chords can have 2 different names. So we have F sharp here along the 2nd fret, G. The chord here along the 4th fret position, you could give 2 different names, either G sharp or A flat. Now, the first step with bar chords is to understand the concept of a movable bar chord shape. And we've already done that. We now have 12 potential chords with one E major shape. The next step is to get your fingers in shape to play the chords, and you can do that by doing an arpeggio exercise. Simply starting with the open strings, just to verify you have the correct chord, and then actually working on getting all 6 strings to ring by playing slow arpeggios. You want to play slow arpeggios as you work on clarity. If you go too fast, that results in too many stop and start overs. If you practice slow arpeggios, I'll give you an example. Let's say, well, you have a note that doesn't sound clear there. Well, rather than going through the motions and starting over again, if you play a slow arpeggio, you could say, oops, I have to fix that, then go back and work at getting that perfect arpeggio. So the concept, understanding the concept is great, but if you really want to get these bar chords down, you should do a bar chord exercise where you try to get all 6 strings to ring clear. You don't need to go up to the 12th fret. An example of maybe going up 5 frets will be good enough. And in the next video, we'll show you an example of applying a bar chord exercise with the movable E chord shape. Next, we'll go to a movable minor chord shape, and the logical choice for this lesson, for the next one, will be E minor. The reason being, compared to the regular E, if you already know your E minor chords, you know that the only difference between an E major and an E minor is just lifting that first finger. So we're going to follow the same method of making this chord shape movable as we do with the E major. So step 1 is to simply play in the open E minor arpeggio. Now, even though our first finger is already freed up, we still want to switch our fingers to make this movable chord shape a little less challenging to play. And so instead of our 2 and 3 fingers, you're going to switch to your 3 and 4 fingers. Again, you check to make sure it's still the same chord, just fretting with different fingers. And that would be step 2. Step 3 of the method, we take the shape and move up 1 fret, and then we bar across the 1st fret with the 1st finger. Now, we have our 2nd finger freed up a little bit. I might suggest you can actually use that finger as an extra support for the bar if your fingers can reach there. And in this case, just like the previous example, we play all 6 strings. and that would be an F minor chord. Again, this is a 6-string chord with the 6-string bass note, and that letter bass note will match the name of the chord, and E, then 1st fret F. So this chord is an F minor chord. And that's step 3. Step 4 is the chord is movable. So if we were to move up to the 2nd fret, again, another case where we're going to have you, if you want, try and figure it out on your own. This is an enharmonic chord, so you could actually give this chord shape 2 different names. If you want, pause the video and see if you can figure out the name before we go over it. Taking the movable E minor chord shape, you just have to know the chromatic scale and name the bass note to determine the names of the chords as you move up. So open, we have E minor, then F minor. As we continue counting up the chromatic scale, the next chord shape would be an F sharp minor chord. Now, you could also call it G flat minor. 2 different names for the same chord shape. And again, knowing the chromatic scale, once you learn a chord shape that's movable, you actually learn 12 potential chords. So if we continue up starting from F sharp on that 2nd fret, we have a G minor chord, G sharp minor, A minor, and then you just continue on. And again, as long as you know the chromatic scale and you know a movable chord shape, you add 12 chords to your chord vocabulary every time. So in this lesson so far now, we've covered with the E major chord, 12 potential chords, and with the movable E minor chord shape, that's another 12 potential minor chords. In the next clip, you can work on getting some clear sounding arpeggios with the movable E minor chord shape. We'll play it from the open position up to the 5th fret position. Next movable bar chord shape we'll cover will be an A minor chord. Now A minor, you only play 5 strings, so let's go to step 1 and review the basic open A minor. And step 2, switch the fingers again. Since A minor is the same shape as E major, it's pretty much identical to what we did with the first E major chord. The only difference will be things are shifted over 1 string, but same chord shape. So A minor, switch the fingers. 2, 3, and 4 fingers are now fretting. The first finger is freed up. Play an arpeggio, again just 5 strings this time. Still A minor. Slide the shape up 1 fret, and then bar just 5 strings. You really don't, especially if you're a beginner, you don't want to bar all 6 because if you kind of pivot up a little bit, you get a little bit more skin on the strings, and that gives you a better chance at clarity. So when barring this 5-string chord shape, really press down those 5 strings, and then maybe that first finger will partially mute the 6th string. And here's how this arpeggio will sound for this chord. And again, we're going to initially try to leave it up to you to figure out the name of this movable minor chord shape. It's A minor to start, but when you move up to the 1st fret, if you want, pause the video, see if you can figure out the name of this particular minor chord. With the movable A minor chord shape, you have a 5th string bass note, and that letter note will determine the letter name of the chord. So we have A minor to start. If we move up 1 fret, counting up the chromatic scale, we would have A sharp. So this chord would be an A sharp minor chord, but it's more often referred to as a B flat minor chord. Remember, The enharmonic notes, A sharp, B flat, they're the same note, and same idea can be applied to chords. So we have B flat minor here. As we continue to count up, we have a B minor chord. And this is a very popular chord. Then we'll have C minor, C sharp minor, and then a D minor chord along the 5th fret. And of course it would continue on. Again, with one movable chord shape, another 12 chords, and that's what I was referring to in the lesson preview. With these 3 movable chord shapes, you have now technically 36 chords added to your vocabulary, 12 with each shape, 12 with E major, 12 with E minor, and 12 with A minor. In the next clip, you can work on getting some clarity from the movable A minor chord shape. Like the previous ones, we'll start with the open position and work on up to the 5th fret position. The 2 movable minor chord shapes we just covered, that gives you 2 potential chord voicings for any minor chord. Let me show you an example. Say the E minor chord. Well, we have the open E minor chord shape, but with the movable A minor chord shape, we could also play an E minor chord voicing with that shape. So if we go back to A minor with the 5 strings, the 5th string bass note, A minor, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E. This is another voicing for E minor. It's great ear training to go back and forth between these 2 chord voicings. And when you learn different chord voicings, that can also be used as a songwriting tool later. You can add a little bit more color or variation to a chord progression. In fact, sometimes going back and forth, that whole thing is just basically going back and forth between 2 E minor chord voicings. Let's do another example. We'll go to the original A minor chord. An open A minor chord voicing. Well, if we took the E minor shape, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A minor. Another chord voicing for A minor. 2 chord voicings for it in total. And this one is pretty much identical to the open A minor, with the exception of the top string. In fact, one way this pays off to work on the sort of technical aspect of learning movable minor chords, Stairway to Heaven is actually part of an A minor chord. It is an A minor chord, just focusing on the top 4 strings, but if you know the concept of movable bar chord shapes, it makes it easier to understand when it comes time to learning these songs. So that's another chord voicing example of A minor, 2 chord voicings for A minor. And let's do a third one. How about B minor? In this case, both chords will require a bar. So we'll start with the A minor shape. A sharp, B minor, that's 1 chord voicing. Now if we took the E minor chord shape, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B. 2 chord voicings for B minor. In fact, what makes this lesson really worthwhile regarding minor chords is that there are only 3 open minor chords you can play on guitar: A minor, D minor, E minor. Any of the other minor chords will require a bar. And one way to see if you have this lesson down is to take what I refer to as a movable minor chord challenge. And what I'll do is I'll call off a particular minor chord, and you see if you can come up with 2 different chord voicings for that minor chord shape. Again, the way to remember this is that E minor is movable and A minor is movable. So you simply count up until you get to the chord we're looking for. And so with this movable minor chord challenge, we would like you to see if you can come up with 2 G-flat minor chords, 2 chord voicings for G flat minor. And if you want, of course, you can pause the video. We're going to go over it in the next clip. But one thing before you start working on it is we're really more concerned with the concept. So if you don't get all the strings to ring clear if you play an arpeggio, that's fine. You want to make sure you're playing the correct strings, though. And, of course, the chord has to be correct. But clear sounding might take you a few weeks. So with that, if you want to pause the video and see if you can come up with 2 G-flat minor chords on your own. For 2 G-flat minor chord voicings, we'll start with the movable E minor chord shape and count up the chromatic scale from there. So we have, we're using the 6-string bass note, E minor, F minor, F sharp minor, G minor. Now I'm doing what a typical beginner student will do. Usually they'll get to G and then they'll realize it's G flat and then go back down and come up with the correct answer. So here is the first chord voicing for G flat minor. It's along the 2nd fret position. The other name you could give to this chord would be F sharp minor. For the second chord voicing for G flat minor, we go to the A minor chord shape and count up the chromatic scale from here. A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F. This time we won't pass it. Here is F sharp, also known as G flat. And there's your second chord voicing for G flat minor. And it's a good idea for your training, maybe go back and forth between the 2 chords. And there's your answer for the 2 chord voicings for G flat minor. Now, some of you may be wondering about the other open minor chord, D minor. Is the D minor chord shape also a movable bar chord shape? And the answer is yes and no. In theory, yes, D minor is a movable chord shape, but the way the hand is designed, it's not that feasible of a chord to actually play, and let's show you why. If we go back to that initial D minor chord shape, seems easy enough to just slide these 2 fingers up, but remember, for any chord to be movable, every note in the chord needs to move up simultaneously or together. So with that open 4th string in D minor, yes, you can slide up those top 3 strings, but we also then would have to go from 0 to 1 on that 4th string bass note, and that requires to do, again, switch the fingers like we did, and then also get either a bar or at least that first finger on that 4th string 1st fret. Now that's a cool sounding chord, but if you can imagine, if you're trying this right now, applying this within a progression where you have to do some switching of chords. So the D minor chord shape is movable. It's just not, as I mentioned, too feasible a chord, but sounds kind of cool if you apply a little fingerstyle technique to it as well and maybe slide up. And I suppose technically we can consider this another 12 movable minor chord shapes. So technically 36 plus 12, that would be 48 chords, movable chord shapes, potential ones we covered in just this one lesson. Now, even though it may take a while to get clear sounding arpeggios from these bar chords, the main point of this lesson is that you understand the concept of these movable chord shapes. It's simply going to make you more self-sufficient when it comes time to teach yourself songs. So for example, if you're on the internet and you see a chord symbol above a lyric, say you see a G with a little m, you will calmly say to yourself, okay, I know I can figure out this chord, because as long as you know that E minor and A minor are movable chord shapes, you can play any particular chord 2 different ways. And with that, you're ready now for the next challenge, and that would be either applying these chords to basic songwriting technique or learning more complex songs with movable minor chord shapes such as Stairway to Heaven or a strum-along version of Hotel California.